The waiting room never announced when something extraordinary entered it. It simply absorbed it, the way it absorbed everything else quietly, without judgment, without warning. Emma Weston moved through Riverside Union Medical Center with a kind of presence that didn't draw attention. Her steps were measured, her voice low, her posture composed in a way that felt practiced, but not performative. She had been there just over 2 months, long enough to learn the rhythm of the place, short enough that most people still referred to her as the new nurse. She didn't correct them. At the nurse's station, a group of residents clustered around a chart, their voices overlapping in confident debate. Dr. Mayers stood at the center, leading the discussion with the ease of someone used to being listened to. Electrolyte imbalance, one resident suggested. No, Mayers replied, tapping the chart. Look at the progression. This is cardiac instability. We treat the heart first. Emma passed behind them, scanning the board without interrupting. Her eyes paused for half a second on a set of vitals, just long enough to notice something that didn't belong. A rhythm that didn't match the story. She didn't speak. Instead, she adjusted an Roman 4 in a nearby bay, her fingers moving with quiet precision. The patient there, a middle-aged man recovering from minor surgery, relaxed almost immediately as the flow stabilized. You've got good hands, he murmured. Emma gave a small nod. Just doing my job. Behind her, one of the residents chuckled softly. That's all she ever says. Another added, some people just like to stay in the background. Mayers didn't look up, as long as they stay in their lane. The words weren't loud, they didn't need to be. Emma heard them anyway. She didn't react. But if someone had been watching closely, they might have noticed the way her gaze lingered not on the people speaking, but on the monitors, the patterns, the details everyone else overlooked. It wasn't insecurity that kept her quiet. It was calculation. There were small things about her that didn't quite fit. The way she stood during emergencies, slightly angled, as if anticipating movement from multiple directions. The way her eyes mapped a room in seconds, noting exits, equipment placement, personnel positioning. Once, a crash cart had malfunctioned during a minor code. Before anyone else reacted, Emma had already bypassed the failure, manually stabilizing the patient with movements so efficient they looked almost rehearsed. Lucky guess, one doctor had said afterward. Emma hadn't corrected him. She rarely corrected anyone. By 9:00 a.m., the hospital had settled into its usual rhythm, controlled chaos, controlled noise, controlled confidence. And then the doors burst open. The sound cut through everything. Paramedics rushed in, boots striking the floor with urgency that couldn't be mistaken. The stretcher rolled fast, guided by hands that knew seconds mattered. Male, mid-60s, one paramedic called out. Unresponsive episode during transport. Heart rate unstable. Possible cardiac event. The man on the stretcher wasn't ordinary. Even before anyone said it, the room felt it. His posture, even unconscious, carried authority. His clothes, though partially cut away, revealed insignia, service pins, medals. A life spent in command. General, someone whispered. That changed everything. Doctors moved faster, voices sharpened, the air tightened. Doctor Mayers stepped forward immediately, taking control. Prep for cardiac intervention. Get me atropine. Oxygen now. Emma moved with the others, but her attention fixed on the patient in a way that separated her from the noise. She didn't look at the title. She looked at the details. The faint discoloration beneath the nails. The rigidity in the jaw. The way the chest rose not weakly, but inconsistently. All of it was wrong. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers lightly against the general's wrist. The skin was cold, but not in the way cardiac patients usually were. There was something else. Something she hadn't seen in years. Her stomach tightened. No, she whispered under her breath. Weston, step back, Mayers snapped without looking at her. We've got this. Emma didn't move. Not yet. Around her, the team prepared for standard cardiac protocol. Medications were drawn, equipment positioned, orders fired in rapid succession. Everything looked correct. Everything sounded correct. And everything was wrong. She lifted the general's eyelid gently. The pupil contracted sharply under the light. Too sharply. Her heart skipped. Not cardiac. Neurotoxic. She straightened slightly. He's not in cardiac failure. No one responded. Or maybe they chose not to. Mayers continued issuing orders. We're losing time. Administer. He needs an antidote. The words cut through the room. This time, people heard. Mayers turned slowly, irritation flashing across his face. Excuse me? Emma's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It's not his heart, she said. It's a toxin. A brief silence followed. Then a resident scoffed. Based on what? Emma didn't answer immediately. She was already moving. Her hands opened the emergency tray, fingers scanning vials with practiced familiarity, not searching blindly, recognizing. So let down. Weston, Mayers barked. You are not authorized. She found it. A vial rarely used, rarely needed. Her pulse steadied. For a moment, the noise of the room faded, replaced by something older. Hot air, thus, the distant echo of gunfire. She pushed it away. Popist. Stop, Mayers ordered, stepping toward her. You could kill him. Emma didn't look at him. She looked at the patient. At the man who was seconds away from dying for a reason no one else in the room understood. He is already dying, she said quietly. And then she injected the antidote. The reaction was immediate. Get her out of here. What did she just do? This is a violation. Voices erupted, overlapping, rising. Emma stayed where she was. Watching. Counting. 1 second. 2. 3. The monitor flatlined. A collective breath caught in the room. And then, a spike. That real. The rhythm returned. Slow at first, then stronger. The general's chest rose sharply as air rushed back into his lungs. His fingers twitched, his eyes opened. The room fell silent. Completely. Emma exhaled slowly, tension releasing from her shoulders in a controlled wave. Behind her, no one spoke. Not because they didn't have something to say, but because they didn't understand what they had just witnessed. The general's gaze moved, unfocused at first, then sharpening as it landed on her. Recognition flickered. Confusion. Then something deeper. Emma, he rasped. Her breath caught. You weren't supposed to. Don't speak, she said gently, adjusting his oxygen. You're stable, that's what matters. But the damage had already been done. Not to the patient. To a office. Now. The voice came from behind. Hill. Sure. Final. Director Hill stood at the entrance, his expression carved from authority and anger. Emma didn't argue. She never did. She simply stepped back, removing her gloves, her hands steady despite the weight of what was coming. As she followed him down the hallway, the hospital seemed to shift around her. Whispers. Avoided eye contact. Judgment already forming in the absence of understanding. She overstepped. She's just a nurse. She got lucky. The office door closed behind her. Hill didn't sit. You violated protocol, he said. You administered unauthorized medication to a high-profile patient without physician approval. Emma stood still. He would have died, she replied. That is not your decision to make. It was the only one left. Hill's jaw tightened. You don't get to make those calls. Silence. Then, quietly. You're terminated. The word landed without ceremony. Emma didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket, removed her badge, and placed it on the desk. He was poisoned, she said. The others didn't see it. That's not your responsibility anymore. She nodded once and walked out. The hallway felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because everyone in it had. She moved toward the exit, her steps as steady as they had been all morning, until the windows began to vibrate. At first, it was subtle. A low tremor. Then louder. Stronger. A sound that didn't belong inside a hospital. Heads turned. What is that? Is that a helicopter? The noise intensified, rotor blades cutting through the air above the building. Staff rushed toward the stairwell. Confusion spread like a ripple. Emma stopped near the entrance. Something in her chest tightened. Not fear. Recognition. Footsteps thundered overhead. Voices echoed down the stairwell. And then, a shout. Loud enough to silence the entire hospital. We need Emma Weston, now. Everything stopped. Every conversation. every movement, every assumption. Director Hill stepped into the hallway, his face draining of color as the words settled into reality. They hadn't fired a nurse. They had just dismissed the only person in the building the military had come for. And for the first time since the morning began, Emma didn't look invisible anymore. For a moment, no one moved. The name lingered in the air like something fragile, something dangerous. Conversations died mid-sentence. Shoes stopped against polished floors. Even the monitors seemed quieter, as if the hospital itself was listening. Emma stood near the entrance, her hand still resting lightly against the glass door. The vibration from the helicopter above traveled through the frame into her fingertips, steady and undeniable. They were here for her. Not the general. Not the hospital. A uniformed officer descended the stairwell at speed, boots striking metal with sharp, controlled force. He didn't hesitate at the final step, didn't scan the room the way civilians did. His eyes locked onto her instantly. Recognition. Confirmation. "You're Emma Weston," he said, not asking. Emma didn't respond right away. She studied him the same way she studied everything, quickly, quietly, completely. His posture, his breathing, the way his hand rested near his sidearm but not on it. Military. Not just trained. Conditioned. "Yes," she said. "Come with me." Director Hill stepped forward immediately, recovering just enough authority to try and reclaim it. "She is no longer staff here," he said sharply. "She has no clearance to." The officer didn't even look at him. "With respect," he said, voice level, "this is no longer a hospital matter." "It is absolutely a hospital matter," Hill snapped. "You can't just." The general requested her. That stopped everything. The words didn't sound loud, but they carried weight. The kind that shifted power without needing to raise its voice. Hill's mouth opened, then closed again. His authority, so firm minutes ago, suddenly felt conditional. The officer finally turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him. When a Delta Force general wakes up after near-fatal exposure and asks for one specific person by name, he said, "We don't debate protocol, we act." Science. Hill stepped back. Not because he agreed. Because he understood. Emma exhaled slowly and followed the officer toward the stairwell. Each step upward felt heavier than the last. Not from fear. From memory. The metal stairs rang under their feet, the echo pulling something old from the back of her mind. The rhythm, the urgency, the sound of boots moving towards something that couldn't be undone. She had walked like this before. Years ago. In a place she had tried to forget. The rooftop door burst open and the wind hit her instantly. Violent. Alive. The helicopter dominated the roof, its rotors still spinning, kicking dust and debris into the air in sharp spirals. Navy personnel moved around it with precise coordination, their movements efficient, purposeful. This wasn't a rescue. It was an operation. "Bring her through," someone shouted over the noise. Emma stepped forward, shielding her eyes against the wind as she approached the aircraft. Inside, the general lay strapped to his stretcher, oxygen mask secured tightly over his face. His condition had stabilized but not enough. Not for what was coming. His eyes found her immediately. Relief flickered across them. "Emma," he rasped. She stepped closer. "You need to stay still, sir." He shook his head weakly. "No, listen." The commander beside him glanced at her. "He's been asking for you since he regained consciousness. Keeps repeating the same thing." Emma leaned in slightly. The general's hand trembled as it reached for her wrists. "It wasn't random," he whispered. "The toxin." Her chest tightened. "I know," she said quietly. His grip tightened just enough to matter. "Same compound," he forced out. "Same one from your unit." The world narrowed. Just for a second. The wind, the noise, the movement, all of it faded behind a single realization. "No," she said under her breath. But the general wasn't finished. "They didn't stop," he said. "They were here." The words landed like impact. Emma straightened slowly. The commander stepped closer. "We've got a second patient inside. I do. Same symptoms. Collapsed less than 20 minutes ago." Her eyes snapped to his. "Oh. We don't know." But she did. Or at least she understood enough to be afraid. "This isn't contamination," she said. "It's targeted." The commander nodded once. "That's what we were afraid of." Emma looked back at the general. at the man who had recognized something no one else could, and in doing so had pulled her back into a world she had spent years escaping. "I need access," she said. "You have it. I'm not staff anymore." The commander didn't hesitate. "You are now." That was enough. Emma turned and moved back toward the stairwell, the officer falling into step behind her. This time, she didn't walk like a nurse. She moved like someone who knew exactly how fast things could collapse when the wrong person stayed quiet. The ICU corridor felt different. Tighter. Quieter. The kind of quiet that didn't belong in a place full of machines. Nurses stood clustered near the station, their voices low, uncertain. Two security personnel guarded a doorway further down the hall, their posture tense. Emma didn't slow. "He's in there," one of them said as she approached. She pushed the door open and stopped. The second patient lay on the bed, pale, motionless, the same unnatural tension in his muscles that she had seen hours earlier. The same discoloration. The same pattern. Her pulse steadied. Confirmation. She moved to the Roman 4 line immediately. "Who set this up?" she asked. A nurse near the wall hesitated. I think Rachel did. She was covering." "Rachel's not on the shift." The room went still. Emma's gaze dropped to the floor. A single droplet. Clear. Almost invisible. But it caught the light just enough. She crouched slightly, her voice lowering. "Don't touch anything." The commander stepped in behind her. "What is it?" "Delivery method," she said. Her eyes traced the faint trail. From the Roman 4 stand. To the floor. To the doorway. And beyond. "This wasn't administered here," she continued. "It was carried in." "By who?" Emma stood slowly. Her eyes fixed on the hallway outside. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. As if on cue, an alarm sounded overhead. "Code Red, unauthorized access in pharmacology." The words echoed through the corridor. Emma didn't hesitate. She was already moving. The commander followed immediately. "Where are you going?" "Where they are." The pharmacology wing was chaos. A cart overturned, vials shattered across the floor, lights flickering overhead in uneven pulses. And above the doorway, a security monitor. Emma's steps slowed as she approached it. On the screen, a figure moved through the room. Efficient. Precise. Not searching. Selective. Every movement control. Every step deliberate. The commander came up beside her. "That's our suspect." Emma didn't answer. She couldn't, because she wasn't looking at a stranger. She was looking at something impossible. The way the figure shifted weight before turning. The angle of the shoulders. The timing of the hands. It wasn't just familiar. It was exact. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered. The footage looped. The figure paused for a fraction of a second. Just long enough for the camera to catch the edge of their face beneath the mask. Emma's world tilted. Because she knew that face. Not clearly. Not completely. But enough. Enough to understand what it meant. "They're dead," she said, her voice barely audible. The commander frowned. "What?" "They died," she repeated, "all of them." He studied her. "Yeah." But she was already shaking her head. Because the truth was already there. Already undeniable. And already moving. Another alarm. Movement detected. East wing. Emma turned. Her body already in motion before her mind could catch up. Because if she was right, if what she had just seen was real, then this wasn't just an attack. It was a return. And whoever was behind it knew exactly who she was. Emma didn't wait for confirmation. She was already moving. The east wing stretched ahead like a tunnel of flickering light and shadow, each fluorescent panel buzzing faintly overhead. Her footsteps were fast but controlled, breath steady despite the surge of adrenaline pressing against her ribs. Behind her, the commander and two armed personnel followed, their pace aggressive, tactical. But Emma wasn't thinking tactically. She was thinking personally. Because there was only one reason someone would move like that. Only one reason someone would use that toxin. Only one reason someone would come here. They turned the corner into pediatrics. The contrast hit immediately. Soft colors on the walls, cartoon decals, small chairs arranged in neat rows, a place designed for comfort. Now filled with fear. Nurses huddled near the station, voices low and shaking. He went that way, one of them said, pointing toward the isolation rooms. Mask on, we couldn't see his face. The man nodded once. That, of course. Reed had always worn one on operations. Not for anonymity. For control. He used to say air itself could be weaponized. That most people forgot how vulnerable breathing made them. The man never forgot. She moved toward the isolation rooms, slowing just enough to listen. Room 1 empty. Room 2 dark, untouched. Room 3. The door was slightly open. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to invite the wrong kind of attention. Imaz stopped. The commander stepped beside her. We breached together. She shook her head immediately. If he sees you, he runs. And if you go alone? He stays. The commander studied her for half a second. Then nodded. 30 seconds, he said quietly. If we don't hear anything, we come in. Imad didn't respond. She pushed the door open. The room was dim. Blinds drawn, light leaking through in thin lines across the floor. The steady hum of an air purifier filled the silence. A crib stood near the wall. Empty. Relief flickered brief, sharp, gone. Because the room wasn't empty. She could feel it. The presence. The shift in air that had nothing to do with ventilation. Reed, she said softly. The name felt foreign in her mouth. Like it belonged to a different life. I know it's you. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a movement. So, behind the curtain near the window, fabric shifted, and he stepped out. Slowly. Deliberately. Mask in place, gloves fitted tight, scrubs blending him into the environment like he belonged there. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. Sharp, focused, unforgiving. They locked onto hers instantly. And everything else disappeared. Emma, he said. Her chest tightened. You're alive. He tilted his head slightly. So are you, he replied. That's the problem. The words didn't carry anger. They carried certainty. Emma took a slow step forward. Reed, we buried you. I know. I saw your tags. You saw what they wanted you to see. Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Fragile. What? She asked. His gaze didn't waver. Because you didn't die. The answer hit harder than any accusation. Emma shook her head slowly. That doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, he said. You were never supposed to walk out of that outpost. Her breath caught. And neither were you, she said. Something flickered in his eyes. Gone just as quickly. I adapted, he replied. Emma studied him. The stance. The stillness. Everything was the same. Except one thing. The absence of hesitation. You're killing people, she said quietly. They're already part of it. They're patients. They're witnesses. The word landed cold. Emma's voice softened. This isn't you. Reed took a step closer. This is exactly me, he said, just without the lies. His hand lifted slightly. And Emma saw it. A small vial. Clear liquid. Familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. If you move, he said calmly, this room fills in seconds. Emma stopped. Every instinct in her body screamed to act. But she didn't, not yet. Reed, she said, her voice steady despite the pressure building in her chest. You don't have to do this. He let out a quiet breath. Almost a laugh. That's what you always say, he replied. Like there's still a version of this where we walk away clean. There is. No, he said, there isn't. A faint sound came from the hallway. Goose. Approaching. Reed's eyes shifted for a fraction of a second. That was all it took. Ina moved. Vet. Her hand shot forward, striking his wrist just as he reacted. The vial slipped. Time slowed. Glass spinning. Liquid catching light. Reed lunged. Emma lunged. The vial hit the wall instead of the floor. Shudder. A fine mist burst outward. Emma grabbed the nearest curtain and yanked it down in one motion, throwing it over the dispersing vapor. Seal it, she shouted. The air purifier roared louder, pulling the contaminated air inward. Reed didn't wait. He was already moving through the adjoining door. But the commander burst in seconds later. Yeah, he's heading down, she said, already moving. Ventilation access. The commander's expression hardened instantly. If he reaches the system, he kills everyone. No hesitation. They ran. The stairwell swallowed them. Down. That. The air grew colder with each level. The sounds of the hospital faded, replaced by the low hum of machinery and distant alarms. Basement. The door slammed open. The corridor stretched long and narrow, lined with pipes and control panels. Harsh lights flickered overhead. And at the far end, Reed, standing at a secure door marked ventilation control. In his hand, a canister. Larger. Heavy. Leather. He didn't turn immediately. Still chasing me, he said. Emma slowed her approach. Still trying to stop you. He let out a quiet breath. You always were. Reed. He turned. And for the first time, she saw it clearly. Not just anger. Not just betrayal. Belief. Dangerous. Unshakable. They erased us, he said. You remember that? Yes. They buried everything. Yes. And you think saving a few people here changes that? It changes everything for them. He shook his head. That's not enough. Emma took another step. It is for me. He studied her. Longer this time. Then you're still weak. The words didn't sting. Because she knew they weren't true. Maybe, she said, but I'm still here. Silence. Heavy. Then she moved. Reed reacted instantly. They collided. The canister slipped from his grip, hitting the floor with a heavy clang. Both of them duff. Hands collided. Reed struck first, driving his shoulder into her, slamming her back against the wall. Pain flared. Emma twisted, redirecting the force, her training taking over before thought could catch up. She drove her elbow into his side. He grunted. The canister rolled closer to the control panel. Reed broke away, reaching for it. Emma followed. Faster. She grabbed it first. And without hesitation, slammed it against the concrete. Was. Twice. The valve cracked. Then silence. The toxin was neutralized. Reed froze. Just for a second. Long enough to understand. It's over, Emma said. He looked at her. Really looked this time. And something shifted. Not fully, but enough. For you, he said quietly. Security flooded the corridor. Weapons drawn. Commands shouted. Reed didn't resist. Not this time. As they restrained him, his gaze never left Emma. You should have stayed dead, he said softly. Emma held his gaze. No, she replied. I chose to live. He didn't answer. Because there was nothing left to say. Hours later, the hospital was quiet again. The kind of quiet that came after something almost irreversible. The general was stable. The second patient was recovering. No one else had been exposed. The system hadn't been breached. Lives saved. Emma stood in the ICU doorway. The general looked at her, recognition clear now. You stopped him, he said. She shook her head slightly. I stopped it from happening again. He nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. A naval officer approached her from behind. The Pentagon wants to speak with you, he said. Your file has been reopened. Emma didn't respond immediately. She looked around. At the nurses returning to work. At the quiet rhythm of a place that almost didn't survive the day. Then back at the officer. I'll come, she said. Not because she wanted to return, but because she understood something now. Some battles didn't end when you walked away. They waited until you chose what to do next. As she walked through the hallway, people looked at her differently. Not with dismissal. Not with doubt. With respect. Quiet. Director Hill stood near the exit. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Because some mistakes didn't need explanation. Emma didn't stop. She stepped outside. The helicopter waited on the roof. The wind carried upward, falling. But she paused. Just for a moment. Looking back at the hospital. At the place she chose. At the lives she could touch without rank, without secrecy, without war. And she made her decision. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But out of purpose. Some heroes didn't need a battlefield. They just needed to show up when it mattered. The helicopter didn't leave immediately. Its blades continued to turn slowly, cutting the morning air into steady, rhythmic waves that rolled across the rooftop. The sound wasn't urgent anymore. It wasn't a call to battle. It was a question. Emma stood at the edge of the landing pad, the wind tugging gently at her scrubs, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the city skyline. Behind her, the naval officer waited. He didn't rush her. People like him understood moments like this. Moments where decisions weren't about orders. They were about identity. You don't have to decide right now, he said finally. Emma didn't turn. I already did. The officer paused. She exhaled slowly. I'm not coming back. The words weren't defiant. They weren't emotional. They were final. The officer studied her profile for a moment, then gave a small nod. I figured you might say that. She turned then, meeting his eyes. They'll still need answers, he added. Debrief, statements, everything tied to Echo Team. This won't stay buried anymore. Emma's expression didn't change. It shouldn't. That answer told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't someone running from the past. This was someone who had already faced it and chosen what mattered more. We'll arrange something off-site, he said. You won't have to leave permanently. Emma nodded once. Thank you. He hesitated, then added quietly. For what it's worth, what you did down there, most people wouldn't have made that call. Emma gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Most people shouldn't have to. The officer didn't argue. Because he knew she was right. Behind them, the rotor speed began to increase again. The moment was ending. But the choice. That stayed. Emma stepped back from the helicopter. Not toward it. Away from it. Back toward the stairwell. Back toward the hospital. Back toward the life she had chosen. The hallway felt different now. Not quieter. Not louder. Just aware. Conversations softened as she walked past. People who once dismissed her now stepped aside instinctively, giving her space not out of fear but respect. Donna stood at the nurse's station, arms folded, watching her approach. You look like you just walked out of a war zone, she said. Emma stopped beside her. Something like that. Donna tilted her head. They're saying a helicopter landed for you. They're saying a lot of things. Donna studied her for a second longer. Then smiled faintly. Well, for what it's worth, I never thought you were just a nurse. Emma met her gaze. That's all I am. Donna shook her head slightly. No, she said, that's all you choose to be. There was a difference. And both of them knew it. Emma didn't respond. She picked up a chart from the desk instead. Routine. Familiar. Grounding. Room 12 needs a line check, Donna added, like nothing extraordinary had happened. Emma nodded. Got it. And just like that, she was back. Not because the day hadn't changed everything, but because she had. Upstairs, in recovery, the general watched the door long after she left. One of the SEAL escorts stood beside him. She didn't go with them, the soldier said quietly. The general gave a small, knowing exhale. I didn't think she would. You knew her before? The general's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. Not personally, he said, but I've read reports. About her. About a unit that wasn't supposed to exist. The soldier frowned slightly. And she was part of it? The general's voice softened. She wasn't just part of it. He paused. Then added. She was the reason some of us made it out alive. Silence settled in the room. Respectful. Heavy. The kind that didn't need explanation. Days passed. The hospital returned to its rhythm. Patients came and went. Alarms sounded and faded. Life continued. But something had shifted. Not in the building. In the people. Doctors who once dismissed now listened. Nurses who once hesitated now stepped forward. And she moved through it all the same way she always had. Quiet. Focused. Unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what to look for. One evening, a young nurse approached her hesitantly. Can I ask you something? Emma glanced up from her chart. Sure. The nurse swallowed. When everything happened, weren't you scared? Emma considered the question. Not quickly. Not casually. Then she answered. Yes. The nurse blinked. Then how did you still act? Emma closed the chart gently. Because someone needed me to. The simplicity of it landed harder than any speech. The nurse nodded slowly. Understanding. Or at least beginning to. Emma returned to her work. Conversation over. Lesson given. Weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address. No markings. Inside. A single page. Oviso. Stamped. Echo team. Names restored. Commendations were written. True. Acknowledged. Emma read it once. Then folded it carefully. Not with pride. Not with relief. With closure. She placed it in her locker. Not hidden. Not display. Just kept. Where it belonged. That night, as she stepped outside after her shift, the air was calm. No helicopters. No alarms. No shadows chasing her through memory. Just quiet. She stood there for a moment. Looking up at the sky. Not searching. Not remembering. Just present. Because for the first time in a long time, her past wasn't something chasing her. And her future wasn't something pulling her away. She had chosen her place. And she had earned it. Some heroes don't stand on battlefields. They don't wear medals. They don't wait for recognition. They walk hospital corridors. They make impossible decisions in silence. They save lives. And then go back to work like nothing ever happened. And maybe that's what makes them the strongest of all. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that the quietest person in the room might be the one holding everything together, like, subscribe, and comment what you would have done.